So we're now live on YouTube. This is the 2018 October 24th meeting of the Node.js modules team. We are joined right now by 13 people, 12 of who are active members, which gives us quorum, and a member who is requesting to join as an observer today. So perhaps a first item of business that we can jump into that could be really quickly is we have an open pull request to add Saleh. Saleh, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly? So mic issues. I can do an intro. Ryan Day is a Google employee, works with me over at Google, is really interested in exploring loaders, and as such wants to get more active in the modules team. So as a first order of business, do we have consensus around adding Saleh as an observer to the modules team? If anyone objects, please say something now. Excellent. Welcome to the team, Ryan. The next order of business. Oh, before we dig in, is anyone up for taking notes?
Oh, wow.
I can do it.
You missed. I missed by a second.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Daniel, was that you?
Yeah, Gil, if you do want to, you can, but I'm happy to as well.
Great. I just feel guilty for not participating in the last.
Don't worry about it.
Great.
No, you don't need to feel guilty. No. Sorry.
Oh.
That's next level.
I've been living with that for all my life.
Let's try to remain productive. Sorry. So the next one that we have for PRs, and we have a 5-minute time box on it, is creating terminology. That I believe was Saleh. That was your PR, and I know that a couple people from the group have approved it. There's no objections right now in the PR. Saleh, can you give a quick overview of it and what we're agreeing to land?
Yeah, so basically a while back, I realized that discussions had terminology that some people were getting with different ideas. So I thought I didn't understand some of them. Maybe some others needed also a reference that we agree on what a term can mean and cannot mean. So if we have a term that is a little loose, we can try to give it a better definition, hence terminology. We created the branch and PR. It's been there for a long time. Over time, some modifications were made to a basic set of terms that were, agreed upon between the members. I also made, after the first set of approvals, I also suggested a second way to do terms, which is a little bit more stipulative. So a term that is within the group has a lot more meaning, defined meaning, than a general term, than generally used, I mean. So the PR is there, it's good to go, and we should start actually collaborating on the actual document. I think there's been enough time for people to object or give feedback.
So one quick question for you about the document, and I didn't want to object in the issue, I just wanted to ask the question here.
Sure.
On line 118, you mentioned deprecated terms, and specifically transparent interoperability is listed now as a deprecated term. Does this imply that it is no longer able to be used in meetings or notes? What does deprecated mean here?
So deprecated terms, I think, was added later on after I put that draft up, but I think it came out of the problem that we had, that we use interoperability to mean multitude of things, including CJS, ESM versus browser. So I think there was a need for us to stop using a term that can cause confusion, because it gets in the way of actually having a good debate or a good discussion. So maybe deprecated terms is not the best terminology. When we land this, we can, everybody's welcome to actually suggest a better way to go about this. But I think, the general sense that we don't want to use transparent interoperability very loosely. So from there, we'll see how we'll revise the document to better reflect things like that.
Can I make a request?
Sure.
Would it be unreasonable to request that we remove the deprecated terms from the doc when we land it and open a new pull request? Because I think having the term deprecated there without a policy around how we should use it, or at least a shared understanding of what deprecated means, is setting us up for a problem. Also, we could land it and then iterate. I'm good with either, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out as an ask.
I'm good either way. I'm not sure who added that section specifically, and I hope they, hear us now and they can actually weigh in if possible. I have no problems whatsoever.
So for people on the call, do we have consensus to land this? And does anyone object to removing the section about deprecated language? We've got a hand up here. It's Jan.
Yeah, I would say let's land it, because in the last couple of months, we didn't really make progress. And I would much rather land it now and then iterate. And if we feel like removing the deprecated section or adding more language to the deprecated section, I think we can do that after landing and just use this as the basis for iteration.
Okay, sounds good to me. So let's land it and then we can iterate on it.
All right.
Okay, great. Congrats, Saleh. If you would like to have the honors of landing it, please go for it. The one thing I would ask is there's a bunch of different commits in there. If you don't mind squashing those all into one commit when you land it.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So next up in the agenda, we have an update on progress. We have a 4-minute time box right now for terminology stipulative terms. Saleh, I believe that's your issue. It's number 184. Is this something that we need to dig into today?
I guess we just landed the document. I'll just reiterate that people should look at the section for stipulative terms. It has only one definition, but it could serve to define terms that need a lot more detail to them in the future. So just bringing it up at this point is what it takes, really.
Okay, great. And so people take a look at 184. There's stuff in there about browser interop and just more terms that we could be better defining. So that then goes next into issue number, well, it's 182, 173, number 85, stuff about the survey. Saleh, that's also you. Thanks for doing so much hard work. Want to give us a quick update on the survey, perhaps a focus on what happened at Interactive and what the next steps are?
Yeah, so at this point, all previous stages of the survey, I think, are concluded. A number of people have expressed previously in internal surveys that they would like to take part in organizing a survey that goes out to developers. We wanted to have a dry run and at Interactive, which really didn't pan out as we expected. One problem really stems from the fact that I'm hesitant to write a question that I'm not sure, if it really reflects what other people in the group want to have asked. From my perspective, I have a very limited commitment in terms of what I would like to get the opinions of the community on. But I'm sure a lot of people here have certain, goals that they would like the community to voice their opinion on whether or not it's a popular thing to have or not have. At the summit, we basically had 15 responses to questions that I kind of wrote away from, topics that relate to a specific tool or a specific way of, dealing with the problems that we keep discussing. So we were we picked very, very non-committed kind of questions. And at the end of it, it basically was well received. People want to be asked questions about modules. But unfortunately, we were not prepared to give a good survey then. My hope is within this group, other people would step up and we basically have, divide the work. People take particular sections, particular questions, and we coordinate this effort, or the opposite, we decide we don't want to go ahead with a developer survey and we can just, close the issues and, seal the deal, basically.
Excellent. What would you advise as next steps for people? Is this something to kick off on GitHub? Do we need to collapse issues, or is there already meetings?
Actually, sorry, give me 1 sec. I'm so sorry.
Geoffrey, you've got your hand up. Do you have anything you want to add in?
Yeah, I guess just while we're waiting for Saleh, I had added some questions that somehow didn't get, I guess they got deleted before it was sent out to the group in Vancouver. And I think, well, there's no process for tracking changes, I think, in Google Forms. So I'm sure whoever was editing it didn't know, that it was me or anything like that. But I mean, I was kind of disappointed not to get answers to those questions, obviously. So I don't know what the solution is, if it's like maybe we do a regular pull request with all the questions and we can edit it collaboratively there, and then there's at least a process for going through it together or something, and then it gets turned into a Google form or what. But there are definitely things I'd like to get answers to, and if people have objections to the wording or whatever, we can, we should have a way of discussing it.
Yeah. So sorry about that. I had everything go wrong in a second. So, okay. So I'll just give my 2 cents on the process and how it evolved.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we're coming to the edge of the time box on this.
Yeah.
Is this something that would be better off for you and Geoffrey to work out one-on-one, or is it good to have the transparency of this being said in a meeting?
I think the transparency on what I found works. It would be helpful.
Okay.
We have meetings that are, separate from the main meeting. Everyone interested would join those meetings, because not using Google Forms and drafting elsewhere makes it a really big problem to actually go back and put the questions in Google Forms. There's a lot of difference between what you think you're going to be putting in the question and when you get to actually put it down in Google Forms, it's very different. The tool and the way it works is not as easy to deal with sometimes.
Okay. 2 things that I can maybe suggest to follow up on this if people are interested. The ComCom has a user feedback initiative that they run, which includes their own meeting calendar, meeting notes, scheduling, and all that. Perhaps this is something that you could collaborate with them on, and perhaps having some sort of regularly scheduled meeting for the team that's going to run with this, that's outside of this meeting, may prove very effective. But perhaps that's something to kick back to GitHub. Are people ready to move on to the next topic?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. So the next topic that we have coming up is discussing phase 2. So this is exciting. We have a pull request open 196. This is Jeff's pull request. Would you like to kick off the conversation?
Do you have it open in front of you? Can you share it?
Yeah, I can drop it in the chat.
Or I can open it and share it. So yeah, this was based on our last meeting, based on discussions with. So in our last meeting, we had, if I can find where to share screen, it's here somewhere.
It's the green button at the bottom.
There we go.
Cool.
Sorry, can you guys see it now?
Yep.
All right. So at the last meeting, we had discussed, we had said, oh, who's interested in helping draft the next stuff for phase 2? I volunteered, Miles volunteered, JDD and Saleh, I think, also volunteered. I feel like I'm forgetting someone. But anyway, we had a call and we drafted this. Then we had another call and we revised it some further. And so here it is. And I hope we've addressed all of the discussion that people have put on the pull request. But basically it was, what's the next lowest hanging fruit that we think has consensus that could be implemented and merged into what's becoming our new modules implementation in that new repo. Yeah, that's basically it.
Cool. Would you like to,
I'll go through the
as
items.
a group, perhaps we could go through each one of these phases individually. Jeff, would you like to introduce each of the phases, and then people can raise hands and ask questions? If we can reach consensus on this today, we can actually start probably digging into implementation details.
So, I mean, one thing that I should probably mention that came up in our call was, as you can see in phase 2, it's not like phase 2 has like a cohesive subject. It's not like, oh, phase 2 is loaders or something like that. It's just more of like, it's almost like sprints where like, these are the things that are kind of ready to be worked on. And I have a feeling that that's kind of how the future phases will end up shaking out in reality, even though like we put down here that like we have goals for them and stuff. Like clearly we do want to get to loaders very soon. So that's like why we're specifically mentioning it here. And certainly there's going to be, tweaks from the earlier stuff that we'll address in phase 4. But clearly there's a lot of features that we have on our README, not all of which I'm sure will end up getting implemented, but clearly we're going to implement more stuff than phase 2 plus loaders. So, inevitably there will be more things added down the road, after phase 2 is done and we start talking about phase 3 and phase 4, these are completely subject to change and should not be treated as like a blueprint set in stone for the next 3 phases. It's just kind of just phase 2. And then this is kind of loosely defined for beyond that. Is that fair to say, Miles?
I definitely agree with that.
Okay. So yeah, and as part of that, it's clearly like this is not like the end of the development process. It's not like this plus loaders and then we're done. So there's clearly a lot more work to be done. But yeah, that's the overview of the phases. I think. Do you want to talk about this one, Miles? You know better than me about this.
Yeah, I can kick off the first one, or actually, I think Gus may be the best person, but it looks like Saleh has their hands up. So let's do that first. Saleh.
Okay, so yeah, I thought we had discussed the idea of bringing back the module from source, which is now under VM. I just want to raise a point about the current state where a VM.module source text really creates one that is outside the module map of your loader. And at this point, I really want to see if, I would love to see a module from source text that actually belongs in the same module map as the loader as a means for tooling, that does not require loaders in general.
Okay. Brad, you have your hand up?
I can already state that I'll probably be against such a thing. We can discuss that offline if you want.
Yeah, that would be great.
I guess maybe some other point I should make is like, we tried to draft this as loosely as we could to try to avoid getting into implementation details. Like we're trying to avoid like in this meeting here, having an argument over model versus main field. You know what I mean? Like if we could maybe like deal with that in the PR process, I guess, or, like we will figure out an implementation of this somehow. We don't need to figure it out now or put it in this document, I think was the point of this. Hopefully we have consensus on that. I don't know.
Jan, you have your hand up?
Yeah. I feel like this list does make sense overall, and I do have strong opinions on the first bullet point in terms of what should actually be that interface and how it should relate to the loader implementation. But for point 3, I think if I remember correctly, maybe I missed something in between, but I think our current loader doesn't even have a resolution for the bare specifier Lodash. So that seems to be something that is implied in that bullet point, and that seems to be, at least to some degree, the bigger question.
Yeah, I think that's what this is talking about. Like this, I think, is possible now, and we're trying to enable this.
I don't think so. I don't think that import lodash/index.mjs is possible right now.
Oh, well, then I guess we're trying to enable both.
So I believe, but I could be wrong on that. I believe that we still left in support for the node modules resolution in the loader. I could dig in and double check. I'd have to go and like boot up that branch again to confirm.
Give me a sec and I can check.
Well, I mean, either way, I think we're trying to support both of these is clearly the gist of what was written here. So unless anyone's opposed to supporting both.
Yeah.
I mean, I do have opinions on that.
Okay.
As in, I don't believe that node modules resolution should be built in, because I don't think that should be an opinion that Node has. That should be, to some degree, left to user land, because otherwise we will get into a situation where NPM or Yarn trying to implement a consistent package caching will have to hack around what Node is trying to do.
Jordan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, Jan, maybe you and I can talk about it offline, but I think that the problem, if Node doesn't have an opinion there, then the situation we get ourselves in is NPM and Yarn and 17 other alternatives are all competing and userland gets fractured. I think it's absolutely critical that Node has an opinion about that sort of thing. It'd be great if it's something that can be adapted to other approaches, of course, but I think there has to be a reasonable default there. Otherwise, it will be catastrophic.
This is me putting up my hand to chime in. One of the intents as we were talking about this, and I think the idea was that a module system that has a good user experience is going to require bare imports, and that's a module system both in the browser and in Node, and hopefully the two are able to work with one another. What we were kind of building off of here, and we can decide how we want to actually implement this, was that we have, legacy technology. We have existing technology today that puts things into a node modules directory. The fact that it goes into node modules is kind of like happenstance. We could like theoretically call it whatever it wants, but like changing it to not be called node modules right now would be like a pretty massive ecosystem thrash. But that like the behavior, the high level behavior could be consistent, and the underlying way in which it's implemented becomes more of an implementation detail of the embedder of the platform that's implementing it. So while the browsers may be exploring package name maps of the way of implementing this, and those files may or may not be in a node modules folder, the code import blank from blank will work. And that the underlying mechanism, whether it being a package name map or some sort of special install tool, will kind of hide that from the user. So I think relying on node modules, at least as an entry point, seems to be consistent with what would happen in the browser. I wouldn't see NPM or even Yarn, for example, changing that without completely changing the loader hook altogether. What may change, for example, is deep traversal or the algorithm for how we're resolving that. And that's what I was thinking would be important for us to kind of examine and try to work out right now. Gil, you have your hand up, and then Gil, are you moving to a different point? Because if Jan has a direct response, but it makes sense.
But if it's about node modules, then I totally agree, not to throw away the node modules thing, but isn't that the whole idea of loaders, extensible loaders, and doing userland experimentation, having different sets of things that we can try out? I mean, how is that different from other kinds of loaders that we want to experiment with?
Just to jump in real quick to clarify my earlier point, I think it's important that all of the things that people want to try out be possible, whether, including like no file system at all. But I was just talking about the default.
Mm-hmm. Jan?
Yeah, just to clarify, why I don't believe that defaulting to node modules or having that be the thing that ships is too valuable. I mean, having it as an opt-in thing or an officially maintained thing, sure, but it feels like Node modules is a directory that is primarily created by NPM or Yarn. And both of these projects have recently signified pretty clearly that they don't really care for keeping to create Node modules. They both have Shift products that actively get rid of Node modules and actively try to hack the current loader to please do not use Node modules. So giving them, like, nobody outside of those parties will create Node modules. So it feels like if they are creating Node modules, giving them the control, or when they are installing dependencies, giving them the control of how the dependencies should be resolved seems like a reasonable solution.
One point I'll add really quickly on is that while NPM and Yarn are the people who are doing the install, and while they're exploring options that are not Node module specific, as a person who works for a cloud provider with a past product, we also rely on that folder and have lots of infrastructure for how we install, distribute, cache, and distribute modules, as I would imagine pretty much anyone who's running something in production does. And I can't imagine that this level of shift would happen so much so quickly that we wouldn't want to ship it. With that being said, if it makes sense for us to punt on this particular point for phase 2 and move it to a phase 3 or phase 4, I think that makes sense.
I can't really raise my hand, but do you mind if I speak to that for a second?
Oh. Yeah, and then Bradley's up after you.
Okay. So the point on here doesn't mention Node modules folder or not. So this is written as like, just make this syntax possible. I think we can agree that we want to do that. As far as like whether it should be implemented with or without Node modules or package name maps or any of that kind of stuff, I think that that's just something we need to explore and can be part of the process of implementing it. And maybe we should have calls specifically about, the effort to make PRs to implement this. And I'm happy to organize those if people want. But unless we're opposed to supporting like users writing code of this like this in general, regardless of implementation, then I would think we can leave this on here. I would think. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
Brad, you've got your hand up.
So this kind of directly feeds with what Jeff just said. I don't know how we're going to support that without some defaults. We can't remove all defaults from everything and just say, hey, userland, figure out how to load even text files. If we aren't able to reach consensus on some mechanism, such as Node modules in phase 2, that means we have to leave it up to loaders, which means this should really be phase 3. So we will need to reach some consensus if this is going to remain phase 2. Some mechanism must work. That's it.
How about this? If I can propose, if it's okay with people, why don't we like land this as like we're gonna try to implement this. There's gonna be a follow-up where like there's a pull, whenever someone makes a pull request, or there might be multiple pull requests to try to make this work. That could be where we like have to hash out like, oh, which ones of these do we want to land? What do we want to have consensus? And there will be a lot of effort going into making those pull requests. I also think it's going to be really hard to try to find consensus on like implementation of this in a 10 or 20 minute time box. So, we should spin off, I found it really helpful to have a call specifically about writing this phase 2 document. So maybe that's a tool we could use to try to, have deeper dives into things and have more time to actually reach consensus and hear everybody out on things.
One quick thing to add before Kevin, Guy is having to drop from the call earlier. I'm just checking to see they're not on the call anymore. So there was a 10-minute agenda item specifically for Guy to talk about the progress on the dynamic module proposal. That's getting punted to the next call. So I'm adding 10 minutes to the time box for this. So we still have another 14 minutes to discuss this topic. Kevin, you're up.
Yeah, so this may be a crazy idea or a bad idea, but what about swapping phase 2 and phase 3? Because if we have infrastructure for creating our own loaders and stuff, then people can experiment with different strategies for fulfilling the requirements listed in phase 2. And that way, maybe we can make progress without getting into some of the conflicts that have given us trouble in the past.
Bradley or somebody else who's more familiar with the current code base, is it ready for loaders to just be a PR dropped in?
I mean, loaders need more design work. We need more people to talk about loaders. People just kind of use them ephemerally right now. We have a loader implementation. We have a couple of different ideas on how to move forward with it. Jan put up his stuff recently in the modules working group. I have a separate one and some presentations and things. But if we're gonna do loaders as a phase, it's gonna be a lot of talking about the pros and cons of capabilities of the loaders and the APIs to satisfy that. It's fine. I mean, we have the right hook location. There's only one hook location the spec ever gives you. And then it's just how you want to wrap it up. So we can do it whenever, but it's going to be just a lot of design work. There's nothing to just drop into the implementation.
Saleh?
Yeah, so I guess I'm gonna talk about what's happening in the call and what's happening in the chat. Yeah, so Gus, I do actually want to see a virtual module, not a virtual machine module. And as for swapping phases, I actually want us to think of that idea. Like I actually think I'm inclined to say that having a loader that we can learn how to optimize our defaults with by experimenting and allowing other people to experiment gives everyone the opportunity to find pain points that could be mutually beneficial for both the defaults, as in Node needs to run fast, and the use cases, not necessarily the feature list, but the use cases that drove the feature lists. So I'm very, I'm actually very impressed. This idea could actually, make it very exciting.
So my hand up, which was after Salah and then Gil and then Jan. To your point, Kevin, about like switching the phases, what I personally think would make the most sense is that anything that we don't have consensus on for phase 2 just comes out. But I feel that things like, at the very least, like improving CommonJS interoperability, like require from path. I think there are things that are not related to loaders that are clear and obvious user experience enhancements that we can make. And so at least for myself, the intent with phase 2 was to identify those things that could be worked on aside from loaders, so that we could have some incremental enhancements and wins before. I think similarly, the out-of-band mechanism for command line disambiguation for like eval or std in, I don't think that those are things that necessarily need to be tied directly to loaders. So perhaps phase 2 could be better phrased as like, what are things we can do that are unrelated to loaders, so that we can still have, so we can have kind of like a parallelized effort. Gil, to you.
Yeah, I just wanted, I asked the question about what are virtual modules. I didn't really get it. If somebody can give a brief, like 1 minute explanation.
Yeah, so I think I can take that one. We have in the experimentals virtual module, VM module or VM module from source text. Basically, it's a module that gets created. I'm not sure if it's in a different separate context or not, but it does not enter the module map of the experimental loader, the ESM loader instance. But it could actually, I think, link to modules that are in it. I'm not sure. but I believe it's a one-way link. And I wanted to step away from this idea and actually move, towards the idea of how you could dynamically instantiate really crappy, but still they do exist, modules from source text in the browser. The cleanest implementation is one that you could do with a service worker, and browsers, are implementing that now. So the idea of a virtual module from source is a module that does not exist on disk anywhere, but rather given source, and other modules in your map can actually find it as if it was a virtual source on disk.
Thank you. Jan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so one argument for keeping the current order where at least the VM source text module comes before the loader is because it gives us an opportunity to potentially define an API that is customer facing or consumer facing, client facing, for how to interact with modules that could then be leveraged in the loader design. So the loader design can actually build on top of. So I'm a big fan of that kind of layered API design, where you can have a relatively low-level primitive, which is the source text module, which in theory could be an API that is powerful enough to basically implement a complete loader in userland, and then have a official loader, canonical loader in Node core that builds on top of that primitive.
That's perfect.
Thank you, Jan. Bradley?
Sure. So this topic actually is something that TC39 has spent a lot of time on. When they originally made ES modules, they had a loader spec. They pulled it out because of problems. Those people eventually moved on to start working on what's called the Realms API. The Realms API is still in progress. You can join the calls. They're open to the public. Let me know if you want to be in it. But a clear thing that's been going on with the Realms API is these things are not exposed to JavaScript. Almost all of the ways you interact with the Realms API as it has evolved from the Loader API to this new one has converted everything that they used to do using JavaScript objects to be purely string-based operations. A little bit similar to how service workers in the browser are string-based when you're sending stuff between the service worker and the main thread. If people are interested, that's something that's great to go to if we want to actually enable this kind of cross-module map population. But if you have concerns about why it's bad to just let arbitrary objects into the module graph, please join the Realms API calls, because that's pretty much what they talk about for 4 hours a week. So that's it.
Thank you,
right.
Brad.
That's what I need more
Kevin,
of in my life.
just before you chime in, Kevin, I want to let everyone know we have just over 5 minutes left in this. Kevin, if you don't mind, I'm gonna interrupt you about 3 minutes when we have about 3 minutes left. If you get to there, so we can see if we have consensus on anything. Kevin, go for it.
Cool. Yeah, so the strategy that you, Miles, described a couple of minutes ago, where we go through the phase 2 items and try and get consensus on the more easy ones. And then for the things that we can't get consensus on, then we push those back until after we've had time to experiment with loaders. That seems like a reasonable approach that could make progress.
Okay. Excellent. That's a really great tee up to what I want to do next. I want to go through each of these points one at a time and see if we have consensus on them. Do we have consensus that phase 2 will include reintroducing virtual module from source integration? Any objections to including that in phase 2?
I only object if we try to shove it into the main module graph.
Okay, but that's an implementation, not...
No, that's very strong. I would not even want to go forward if that's part of the plan.
Well, I think we're going to vote on it again when there's a PR to merge in, right? So if there's objections to the implementation, that would be the...
Yeah, but it does change
That's a plan. That's not an implementation detail.
yeah, I agree with Bradley that it does make a difference. We might have the exact opposite preference. But for example, if the plan would be that it is not possible to link it into the module graph, then I would not put it into phase 2 because I would find it much less important.
So if I frame it a certain way, and Salah, I'll hand it off to you in a second. Do we have consensus of kind of like a stage 1 kind of thing here that in phase 2 we will be exploring this problem space independent of the implementation, and we will punt it if the implementation seems to get to a place that we don't have consensus on? I hear no objection.
I think we have objections with just the plan for it between me and Jan right now. Maybe me and Jan can take it offline.
Okay. Excellent.
I would be okay with even me 2 PRs, 1 for each approach, and then we can debate it.
I am not okay with that because I don't think it's something that should be taken so lightly. That has taken people like 5 years trying to figure out this problem, and we aren't talking with them.
So Brad, would you prefer that phase 2, instead of reintroducing virtual module from source integration, we change reintroduce to explore virtual module from source integration, and at a point there that includes engaging with the Realms team?
That would be fine.
Does anyone object to us changing it to that language?
I would object actually it becoming VM modules based on that. So I don't know what path forward we have if we don't agree on it as a point of, beginning to implement, and then we can discuss the details. So I'm lost, I don't know, honestly. It's not going to be worth it if I need to use create dynamic module, because from source text to dynamic module to module, a loader just cannot do all that.
So I think that you are getting deeper into the implementation details than that title implies. Does anyone, so are you going to object that we should explore virtual modules?
I think hitting the loader phase before settling this phase with this part of the phase would be very hard. So exploring it, so when does the implementation come? Do we add a phase 3?
Can I clarify something? It sounds like the current way that everything is implemented does not use vm.module at all for the main loader.
Yeah.
So these can actually be entirely separate issues. They currently are.
Should we maybe have a design phase of Bradley write out a proposal for how you'd want to do this, and Jan the same, and so on, and we can debate them on paper?
I'd rather cooperate than make sides.
Or have
guys, if we can hold on 1 second, Jan has their hand up. Jan?
Yeah, but just as Bradley said, I think it makes sense instead of 2 people going off and trying to fight each other on their ideas. I think it would make sense for Bradley and myself to just, I'm definitely less aware, for example, of the RAM's work than he is. So I might just be missing context when it comes to designing that kind of API. So I think what Miles proposed was to have this kind of design phase in phase 2, to come up with, if there is an API that is either compatible with the module graph or is completely detached from the module graph, and how that API should look like. Basically, is there an vm.script API for modules, and how would it interact with the rest? And I think having that kind of design work in phase 2 could find consensus. That's my feeling right now.
I just put into the chat a text. It's explicitly explore design space for virtual module from source. Does anyone object to that specific title for this 1 point? Cool. So I'm going to assume that we have consensus there. The next point, improve CommonJS interoperability. Do we have any objections to this being something that we explore in phase 2? Okay, excellent. We can move forward with that. Support importing a package entry point, e.g. import _ from Lodash. Does anyone object to having this part of phase 2? Jan, I'm just going to ask you really quickly, because you did have points on there. I don't think it's a big deal to push this to phase 3 or until we have loaders. Are you okay with this being something that we explore in phase 2?
I think yes, and I would prefer personally to rephrase it as define semantics for import underscore from Lodash, because I'm actually not sure if import underscore from Lodash / deep import would be the thing that would work. So that's why I'm becoming queasy when it comes to this topic.
Can I? I'm sorry, I can't see who's raising hands or whatnot. Miles, if there's
no one has hands up right now.
I have interest in the specifics of the usability of this when it gets implemented. So if maybe like people want to say like who's interested in working on this, if we can maybe stay in touch or have calls every now and then or something, I'd love to have discussions with the various people who are going to be working on this to just to try to keep our consensus as it gets built.
Yeah, identifying champions is a great idea here, Geoffrey. So if going back, reintroduce for the virtual module stuff, I think we identified Brad and Jan as the two champions for that.
And Saleh.
And Saleh. Is that, I would like to be the champion for improving common JS interoperability. Does anyone have any problems with that or want to join me? Cool. And Daniel will join me on that. Thank you, Daniel. I tried to identify, Jan, the way in which you suggested the change for the third bullet point to define semantics for importing a package entry point, e.g. import underscore from Lodash. Does that capture your intent or thought process there?
Yes.
Does anyone object to that being the title for that third bullet point? Okay, excellent. I would love to help champion that. Jan, I'm assuming you have some opinions there. Anyone else?
I mean, I think Guy Bedford, he posted something today about this, so you might want to add him to the list.
Okay, so that would be myself, Geoffrey, Jan, and Guy for this one. Actually, I'll just step down. Jeff, Jan, and Guy, you take this one because I'm stepping up for other things.
Okay, I'm going to join as well.
Saleh? Okay.
And Daniel, I think.
So maybe the best thing that we could do is land this phase 2 with the text and then have people open another pull request to identify the champions, just so that people who weren't on the call have an opportunity. Are people okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So the last one that we have on the list here is an out-of-band mechanism for command line disambiguation of source entry point parse goal. Does anyone object to this being part of phase 2? Jan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, sorry for that person. I think this is a rather fundamental issue where constraining it to -- eval and or standard in might not necessarily be enough, because if we just restrict to that, then we end up with -- mode equals or -- content type equals, which I don't believe would then work later on when we come to the bash entry point question.
Mm-hmm.
So, and at that point, we kind of run into the same wall that we have run into consistently, which is as long as the name of the entry point binary doesn't change, we will run into the same issue, at least for something that doesn't have a file extension that is unambiguous. And at that point, if we have a different binary name, that question would be answered.
Do you think that this could be similar to the change we wanted to make for the virtual module space, where we just explore the problem space?
Can I just respond to that, Miles?
Yeah, Jeff, and then Saleh, and then Jan and Brad.
So the earlier draft of this made clear that this was probably going to be not necessarily throwaway code, but like very likely to change later, because we still need to sort out all these issues with this stuff and with like if we're going to do that MIMES thing or ESM and JS and all those other types of things. So the idea here was like just put a flag in there now, and like very likely when we have some kind of more sophisticated way of defining the entry point and or defining how file extensions are treated or MIME types and so on, then this would get replaced with something that parallels that more complicated configuration. but just so that there's some way of running ESM for these modes for now, I was thinking like just adding a flag should be very easy as a quick thing that gets, replaced later was the thought.
I know everyone has their hands up. Really quickly for the sake of time, because we only have 5 minutes left. An alternative title for this: Explore design space for an out-of-band mechanism for command line disambiguation of a source entry point parse goal. Does anyone object to that title? Just say it, it's fine.
Yeah, because the whole point is that this is just like a temporary thing. Like exploring the design space means figuring out how we're dealing with all entry points, period. Yeah. And that's like too broad. Like I think we just need to get something small and then iterate, and we'll figure out the way that overall design space like later as we go.
Since we only have 4 minutes left on the call and we have consensus on the first three, but not on this one, does anyone object to us removing this fourth point, landing the first three that we have consensus on, and opening a new pull request to expand phase 2 and work on that in the next meeting?
Could I suggest one thing here? Sorry, because it will make a big difference in how we test. The hash bang or shebang, just finding a way, MJS that is the entry point with a shebang would actually be honored as an entry point of ESM.
Okay, thank you. Brad, you had your hand up?
Yeah, so I think we're a little overly focused on some existing designs here. There are alternatives which we haven't really dug into, like data URIs that we could be loading for eval or whatever, which do include format information inside of them inherently. So I think there's a lot that we could still look in here that might solve Jan's issues.
Can I just propose an alternate to try to get consensus, Miles?
Sure.
How about this? Can we just phrase this to say like a temporary out-of-band mechanism?
I don't think we have time to do that to
be replaced later, because I think having support for this will make it much easier to like iterate on this.
I don't agree with the temporary.
Yeah, and I was about to basically go into the same direction as Geoffrey just went, which is, if our goal is to have a temporary mechanism to easily eval some string as a module quickly, mostly for people who are investigating things about modules realistically, if that is the goal, couldn't we just have a bash script that we put up as a gist that people can install and link in, that is ESM eval, and it implicitly creates a temp file from the thing that you try to eval that is called something.mjs, and then invokes Node with that temp file. If the solution is, if it's about a temporary solution to eval a string as a module, that feels like the more appropriate solution.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're getting really deep into implementation details right now, and we have 2 minutes left. I think it's an interesting space to explore, but we did have one other thing we wanted to get to before we're done. So really quickly, does anyone object to landing the first 3 points, changing the name of this third point to define semantics for import a package, changing the first point to explore design space for virtual module from source, removing the out-of-band mechanism from now, and opening a new pull request to explore that and discuss in the next meeting? Okay, awesome. We have consensus on that. Guys, we did phase 2 in literally 1 meeting. That's incredible. So the next one, really quickly, ESM module, ECMAScript modules number 9. We have a DevSnack Gus did a great refactor because we now have an import meta. This is approved by Brad and by Guy. Does anyone object to landing this on ECMAScript modules right now? Oh, wait, Gus, what do you object to?
We can't land anything until we discuss how we're keeping the repo up to date.
Okay. So I think that we do not have time to dig into that right now. Gus, do you want to we can punt that to GitHub, come up with a proposal, I'll help you work on it, and we can have some language about keeping it up to date that we can bring in the next meeting?
Cool.
Okay, great. That's it, everyone. Jeff, can you take the action item of updating all that stuff, and then you can land the PR for phase 2 and open the new PR?
Yeah, whoever took the notes can send them to me, sure.
Okay, great. I can also just quickly edit it and just put a fix up commit on there. For the people who are in the meeting, if you don't mind putting your +1s and LGTMs on that issue before it lands, once we update it, it just helps to have it from a documentation standpoint. Okay, we're going to end the meeting now. Thank you, everyone, for being so productive. This was really excellent. We'll come back in 2 weeks. See y'all.
Thanks.